Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships or at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's much more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are your greatest asset. And a special offer to I'ma Let You Finish listeners, you can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/I'ma Let You, IMMALETU. That's betterhelp.com/I'ma Let You, IMMALETU. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
What's up, everybody? It's I'ma Let You Finish with Court and Amy on the Pantheon Podcast Network. We're back. It's show number 95. What's up, Ames?
Not much. You?
Life and good things like that. Oh, we have a guest today. Why don't you introduce our guest?
We have a guest today, author Michael Goldberg, who has written a book, really fascinating and interesting book called Wicked Game, the true story of guitarist James Calvin Wilsey, who is one of these people. Well, we'll talk about it, but you know his music, you might not know the name, and it's a fascinating story about success and punk rock and music. And so we're going to talk to Michael about it.
Excellent. So it is finally decent weather in New York.
My God, it's gorgeous.
We have sun.
We have sun, but it's not too hot, but it's not too cold. The allergies seem to have gone somewhere, which is nice, which is always good when the allergies go somewhere. And it was so windy that my mask flew off my hand and I chased it down the street. Like an idiot.
Hilarious.
No, it was hilarious. It was actually something out of it was ridiculous. I was like going, stop that mask.
Okay.
Anyway.
So the time people have been waiting for it has happened. Kendrick has dropped his first single and video. We're getting our first taste of this new album that's coming. What do you think?
I've listened to the song 3 times now. I will say this. It's called A Heart Part 5. I will say this. I think the video is getting a lot of buzz because what he does in the video is he incorporates a deep fake. By the way, it's the guys behind South Park.
Yes. They have a company, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And where he morphs into O.J. Simpson, Jussie Smollett, Will Smith, Nipsey Hussle, and one more person. Who's the other person? I forget. So it's kind of hard to listen to the song and watch the video at the same time, just because your eyes are, for obvious reasons, drawn to the artistry and the technique of the video. So I listened to the song itself. He's a very powerful lyricist. Some of the things I'm reading online, and you'll tell me, is that people are not crazy that he sampled Marvin Gaye's "I Want You" so blatantly. That there's no, it's just there. And that they wonder whether someone can be a great lyricist and do you have to be so serious now? Because he is a serious artist, but does he ever have fun? Is there anything about him that's fun? But I think that there's an aspect of him that's a little goofy.
I think Yeah, and I
The
think that's
Kung Fu Kenny stuff, the Kung Fu Kenny stuff.
and I absolutely think that that's an unfair criticism of him. There's a lot of bullshit out there that's silly and dumb. If you want that, you know what I mean? There's such a feel of that. And I think he's an important artist, and it's okay that somebody like Nas was never known for being silly and fun. You know what I mean? So it's like he reminds me of the vein of a real lyricist who comes out when he has something to say. I prefer you have something to say than it having to be light. And we don't know what else is on the album, right? So
No. I think what people are saying, and I 100%, I'd rather hear somebody talking about somebody than somebody mumbling. But what they're saying is, can you be considered a great hip hop artist and not have something capital S to say? And I mean, I would say that someone like Vince Staples and Pusha T fits that bill, right? I mean, they're not breaking new ground in what they have to say, but they're great artists. But look, Kendrick is always someone we've talked about that you have to pay attention to him.
Absolutely.
You have to pay attention to him. The song is #1 on Rap Caviar this week, which is an indication. It'll be interesting to see if the kids, anybody under the age of 40 responds. That's what's going to be interesting, because
I believe they will. I believe they will.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, because there are other artists out right now who are making good hip hop records, very different artists than him. But it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what the next single is.
Isn't it? It's kind of exciting to me that it's like, great, lyricists are back. People really kind of coming with beats and the type of hip hop that I like. It's not the.
Yeah.
To me, it's not the trendy shit that's like, listen, and the trendy shit is great. So I say shit is just the way I talk. It's great. But I also think you need the guys who come back who give you albums, right? And Kendrick's an album artist to me. I just put his albums on and I just play them. Pusha T is an album artist to me. I put on his album, I play it. Vince is they have singles that I've liked, but these are guys I just put on the album.
Right.
And then I'm doing whatever I'm doing and I let it play all the way through.
But
so it's good.
That is true. But keep in mind that we have different, the average hip hop fan.
I know.
They don't care. They don't even know what it is. They just want to hear the hot song. The hot song. They're ready.
Except for people who listen to him and people who listen to the Vince Staples of the world.
Oh no!
So you got to be true. Now you said that you told me that some of your students, which I was very surprised in high school, didn't really care about Kendrick, which I thought really was a big part of his base. So it'll be interesting to see.
And it's been 5 years. And 5 years in a teenager's time is 100 years.
Right.
So it'll
Very
be
true.
Well, somebody who's not going anywhere, who is like the moment is Harry Styles. And I really seriously think this man can do no wrong at this point. I really think that he can do no wrong. And I think that he has, he has found a sweet spot between appealing to like younger audiences and women my age and men and everybody. I think a lot of it is because he has great songs. He seems to be enjoying himself, but he can actually sing, he can actually perform, and he's got a band. And I think people are really responding to the fact that it's like a band, it's like cohesive. So he's going to be going on tour, right?
He's going on tour, and to piggyback off of what you said, it's almost like to some of these other artists out there, young like pop and rock kids, when you make really good music, if you really and you have a clear vision for it all,
right,
people will show up. I do believe if you stick to yourself and your pure self and what you want to do, it's like there are varying degrees of how they show up in success.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, what I appreciate about him is, yes, he's got the big budgets and the global situation. He could sail through and make these pop rock records. But he's making this music, to me, what I'm hearing sounds like an artist who's really, really coming into his own with the third record. Because you know how it is. When you have the first two successful records, you really get that confidence by when your third record is when you start going into that, what did Barney say, that sweet spot of albums for an artist, where it's really coming out of you.
He's built on each thing. I mean, the first album was a big success. The second album was Watermelon Sugar was a huge single, and he's building and building, and he seems limitless in a lot of ways. And I think he's
Mhm.
gonna the only thing he's not tapping into yet, and I don't think it's his vein, is sort of a dance vibe, but that's not his vein. That's not his
And you
lane
know
at all.
what? We
That's
don't
fine.
need him to go there.
Yeah,
We don't need
but
him to
I
be in the
think that
dance thing.
I really think it's his to lose at this point. He's doing
Yep.
10 nights at the Garden.
Okay, it's 10 nights at the Garden, 10 nights at the Forum in LA, 5 nights in Austin, 5 nights in Chicago.
In Chicago, and something in Miami, right?
And then Miami, I believe, has 5 nights.
Right.
And those are the only US
Yeah.
dates on the tour.
Yeah, unbelievable.
10 dates at the Garden, which you absolutely 1000% know are going to sell out the
That's
day they go on
100,000 people.
sale.
That's 100,000 people.
That will be in, and there are people who are going to be there every night. And first of all, he starts this tour off with a special show in New York at the USB Arena, the arena he opened out on Long Island, where he's going to play the entire album with his band. So listen, this kid is doing it really right. He's kind of exciting, and I'm into it.
I love it.
And I could not name a One Direction song, so it's really funny.
Could, though. I could name the one that was because you're beautiful. Yeah, but that's okay. I mean, Courtney. I mean, come on. I mean, we were in our 40s and 50s when my niece could name a One Direction song.
I'm 39 right now.
In metric. All right. Well, speaking of old people, Janet's going to be going on tour. She is old. That's great. That's not a bad thing.
Janet is ageless. She is a legend and an icon, and she is ageless. She has no age. Okay. She is our Black goddess, our Black princess, and just watching those here's what I loved about Janet.
But she is going on tour, right?
Yeah, she is going to go on tour, yes. She originally had a tour called Black Diamond, which I believe is still going to be called, and it was an original set of dates that had actually gone on sale, and COVID derailed that. And I believe it's going to be rerouted and reannounced and all of that. But when I was watching clips of her at the Derby, it was her return to stage after 3 years of not performing. It was just great. Does she dance as much as she used to? No, but I don't need 56-year-old Janet Jackson to try to be 26-year-old Janet Jackson still breaking it down. Let the dancers do the heavy lifting. She looked great. She sounded great. And it made me excited to see Janet again. I can always see Janet. And I'm really, I would love to see her again. Have you ever seen her?
Yeah, I've seen her twice. I saw her, the Black Cat, when she did Black Cat, that tour, whenever that album was.
So the first album, the Rhythm Nation, the first tour.
Yeah, I saw that. Tour. It was great. And then I saw the tour where Tony opened up and blew her off the stage, and she
the Velvet Row.
And that was she's great, but I mean, it was sort of funny to see Tony get up there and just tear the shit down, and then she got rid of him promptly thereafter. But no, listen, she's a great performer. She's absolutely a great performer, and I think it's going to do very well. Should we talk about Live Nation and then talk about what we're listening to, and then
yeah. All right. Let me just tell you something, man. So we see that Live Nation's revenues, they just reported their quarterly revenues, and they're up huge. And it really made me think about the price of concert tickets these days and wondering how anybody affords to take their kids to a bunch of concerts. Because, man, I know the tickets that I'm still very fortunate that all my years of working in the music industry, people still offer me tickets to stuff. But I see the prices on those tickets and seeing how much money they're making. I'm like, it feels like there's some greed in here. Like every festival can't be hundreds of dollars. Tickets, it's just ridiculous. And they're making money hand over. I know.
It's going to get worse purely because of inflation, because of the cost of gas. I mean, that alone, I mean, the greed of Live Nation aside, and we all, yes, of course, but a lot of these artists are making up for 3 years of not being able to be on the road. The merch people, there's a lot of people that lost out on a lot of money. And now just the day-to-day expenses of touring are astronomical.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Astronomical. So, I mean, if we're paying twice as much for milk as we did 6 months ago, you can only imagine what tickets are gonna be. They've already been overpriced to begin with, but now the excuse for the prices being up is almost like legitimate in a way, you know?
And look, we have a guest.
Oh my God, we just talked about the price of things.
We just talked about the price of things.
Hi, Michael.
Hi. How you
Do you-
doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, in
Yeah.
your honor, I'm wearing my Dead Kennedys Too Drunk to Fuck t-shirt.
And I'm wearing my my Wicked Game t-shirt.
Well, let me give you like the proper real introduction, and then I'm going to try to figure out whether we knew each other back in San Francisco, because I'm thinking we did. But you were like on a much higher level. You were like not crawling around on the floor looking for loose change at clubs like I was. All right. That's a whole nother story. All right, so we're going to introduce everybody. This is Michael Goldberg. He is a writer. He is an author. He was the West Coast editor for Rolling Stone back in the day. He started the online magazine, one of the first online music magazines, which I actually wrote for you guys, Addicted to Noise. And he was the VP of SonicNet. And he has now written this very, very cool, very emotional book called Wicked Game, The True Story of Guitar's James Calvin Wilsey. So thank you for joining us, Michael.
Sure. No, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So for me, reading, I lived in San Francisco from 76 to 1980. And I was very, knee deep in the punk scene and stuff like that. So reading this book for me was very emotional because you talk about a lot of people that I knew, that I was friends with, a lot of people who are departed. And we talk about James Wilsey, who I first met when he was Jimmy Avenger, because, right, everybody took the name of their band as their last name. So why don't you talk to us about your relationship with Jimmy and why you decided to write this book? And it really is a very emotional, for me, was a very emotional book.
Well, I first met Jimmy in 1982. I was writing a story about upcoming bands in San Francisco for the San Francisco Examiner. And one of the bands that people kept telling me I should check out was Silvertone. And Silvertone was this band that was comprised of Chris Isaak, Jimmy Wilsey, a drummer named John Silvers, and a bass player, Jamie. Anyway, Jamie was the bass player. And so I went to the Berkeley Square and I met Eric Jacobson there for the first time. And Eric was their co-manager and their producer. But I knew Eric because when I was a kid, there were all these records by the Lovin' Spoonful that were hits. They were all in the top 10. And, Do You Believe in Magic? And, Summer in the City. And just these are great songs. And Eric had produced those songs. So he was like, in my mind, he was like a superstar producer. And here he was now with this new band. So anyway, me and Eric talked. He took me backstage. I met all the band, including Jimmy. And then after that, I don't know, a year or two went by, and then Silvertone were playing around the city, and they were recording things, and then they made a first album. And so at that point, I started writing stories about them, and they were mostly about Chris Isaak because it switched from Silvertone to Chris Isaak. But along the way, I would talk to Jimmy, and I'd see him at gigs occasionally, and then I interviewed him at length in 1987 for a Rolling Stone story about Chris Isaak. And then after they had Wicked Game, I profiled Jimmy for Guitar Player, and we started hanging out, and we became friends. And I had an indie record label briefly at that point, and we were making a video in Santa Cruz, and he came along. We were in Santa Cruz for the day, and then I would go to his house or his apartment, and so that's kind of how I met him. And he was a great guy. I mean, he was a brilliant musician. I mean, really a brilliant musician, but he was a really nice, gracious guy, and he would just do things for his friends. I mean, he gave my son guitar lessons for a while. When Penelope Houston after the Avengers, when she wrote her first song, post Avengers. Jimmy invited her over to his place and they made a demo of it. And he just spent a bunch of time. And this is when, he was busy with Silvertone and Chris Isaak, but he made the time to help, Penelope out because they were friends. And that was just the kind of guy he was. And so anyway, then he got involved in drugs. And I kind of heard it through the grapevine because when I was with him, I never really experienced that, except at a certain point, he started getting very flaky. I mean, you would call, he wouldn't answer the phone. You would go to his place, knock on the door, no answer. Anyway, things happened in life. I mean, he goes his way, I go my way. And then in 2018, I was working on a story actually about the lasting impact of the Mabuhay Gardens. And
the Fab Mab.
Yep. And this was for a book about Dirk Dirksen that was published by Last Gasp. It's a pretty cool book. But anyway,
Courtney, Dirk Dirksen was San Francisco's version of Hilly Crystal, except that he was 100% meaner than Hilly was. But in a nice way, but he was mean.
Well, he liked to insult everybody,
yes,
but he wasn't actually serious about it. And everyone kind of pretty quickly got in on that. And so then it was just kind of part of his shtick. But anyway, I reached out to Jimmy via Facebook Messenger in June of 2018. And I was saying, Jimmy, it'd be great to get you on the phone briefly. I'd like to get some quotes for this story I'm doing, about the Mabuhay. And there was just no response.
Yeah.
And anyway, time went by. Eventually, like a month later or something, he popped up and said, hey, I miss you. Yeah, we should talk. And I said, well, what's your phone number? And then there was nothing again. And then eventually he came back with something like he lost his phone, and but it was just this flaky thing, and I figured, God, the guy's got to be back on drugs, and this is weird. And then on Christmas Day, I read that he had died. There was a post, in the Mabuhay Gardens chat on Facebook.
So why the San Francisco punk scene? So like you were born in California, and that it just became something you were just fascinated from as a young person. You were like, punk?
No, I mean, I actually, I came of age at the tail end of the 60s. I was I was in 1967, I was 14. Okay. So I was actually able to experience some great concerts and free things in the park and all that.
Right.
When punk happened, basically 75 is when things, the New York thing was happening. And I subscribed to the Village Voice so I could read about what was happening in terms of the New York punk scene. And then the San Francisco scene started the very end of 76, and then 77 was was when it really came into its own, and the whole Mabuhay scene happened, and the really great San Francisco bands were playing Avengers and the Mutants and
the Offs,
the Nuns, the Crime, the Offs, the Dills. There were just a lot of great bands, and it was. So first time I heard the Sex Pistols, Anarchy in the UK, I flipped. It was just great. And sort of people who were a little older experienced this groups like the Sex Pistols, and then the Ramones actually before the Sex Pistols, of course, and the whole New York scene. People Richard Hell and Television, and people who were around my age, they experienced it in one of two ways. Either they loved it or they hated it. And I loved it.
Well, it's funny. Did you see the Pistols show? Were you at that show, the Wonderland show? Yeah, I was there. Yeah, me too. I I'm not very young, but I was like 18 or 19. But I remember so vividly the first time I heard the Pistols was on KSAN with Johnny Walker playing them on KSAN, and it was revolutionary to play that on mainstream radio in San Francisco.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
and KSAN, which was the station, had real problems because, I mean, they embraced punk early on, and their listeners did not embrace it.
Right.
And so that became, problematic for that radio station. But what was I going to say? Yeah. So, but we sort of are jumping around. But I just wanted to finish saying about why I actually wrote this book.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I read, like I say, I read on Facebook, Jimmy had died. I was shocked. He was 61 years old. I mean, he should have lived for another, 20 years at the minimum. But he didn't. He's dead. And so then I'm waiting for an obit to show up in the San Francisco Chronicle. Here's a guy he was really one of the stars of the punk scene. He was in one of the best San Francisco punk bands, and not just San Francisco punk bands. I mean, both Lenny Kaye of, Patti Smith Group and Greil Marcus both think that, that the Avengers were one of the best punk bands, period. Certainly of the United States.
I agree 100% on that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I do too. And so he was in the Avengers, and then he was responsible. He was, with Chris Isaak, he was responsible for Wicked Game, a song that reached number 6 in the United States on the charts, but it was a top 10 hit in 9 other countries. This was like an international hit. The song has been streamed just in the last 3 years 200 million times. I mean, which is a lot. And I mean, this is a song and it's still being played on radio all over the world. So this guy, he deserved an obituary in the San Francisco Chronicle, but there was nothing. And I'm also looking in the LA Times because he lived in LA for like over 20 years and he died there, and there was nothing. And there was nothing in Billboard. So I contacted an editor that I'd stayed in touch with at Rolling Stone, where I had worked for a decade, a number of years back. And they said, yeah, write something up for us. So I wrote a 2,000-word story about Jimmy. Well, when I finished that story, I just felt like there was a lot more to tell about Jimmy. And so then I wrote an 8,000-word story for an Australian magazine that I sometimes write for called Rhythms. And when I was done with that, by that point, I was like, how did this happen? How did this guy become a drug addict? Like, what was involved in his life? What are the factors that can lead someone to become a drug addict? And so I wanted to know that. And I wanted to there was just more to his life that I wanted to find out about. And then I just felt like this was a guy who deserved to be remembered. And, he was very frustrated by the fact that when Wicked Game became a big hit, it was all about Chris Isaak. But it was Jimmy who was actually responsible for that song becoming a hit, because he wrote the introduction, the 2-note guitar, lick that opens the song and is so memorable. I mean, you hear that, anyone hears that, and they know the song.
Did he get
But it's
songwriting credit on that?
But it's also video was king when that song came out. And what really took that song over the top was that black and white video with Helena Christensen. And so people remember that whole moment of Chris and Helena and the song and that guitar lick and the beach and the black and white. And it just dominated the airwaves for months and months and months and months.
Yeah, but it never would have gotten on the airplay if not this is what actually happened, okay? So Jimmy had written that lick and all the guitar that's in the song, and David Lynch wanted some music for Wild at Heart.
Right.
And so he put Wicked Game, but the instrumental version of Wicked Game, which is basically Jimmy and a looped rhythm section, and into Wild at Heart. And there was a DJ at an Atlanta top 40 station who saw the film and flipped over this instrumental. And he went back twice more to see the film just to hear that instrumental. When he bought the album, the soundtrack album, they didn't have the instrumental version on that. They had the version with Chris Isaak singing. So, and he loved that. And so now he starts playing that, or not playing it, but programming it on the station. So because it got all this airplay on this Atlanta station, because of Jimmy, Warner Brothers now issued it as a single, which it hadn't done. I mean, Warner Brothers had written off the album it was on, had just written the whole thing off as dead and gone. And so, then it's a single. And so then actually there was payola involved that got the thing played or got it started on a bunch of radio stations around the country. Once people heard it, they flipped for it. And so that got it moving up the charts, and that made it something that where MTV could actually play a video, because they wouldn't have ever played a video just from a song that nothing was happening with an album that Warner Brothers had written off. So Jimmy was really, really key to that whole thing happening. And he was bitter that he didn't get the recognition that he felt he deserved.
Did he get songwriting? Did he get songwriting credit on that?
No,
wow.
He didn't. No, he didn't.
Wow.
No, so he got some. He got the royalties you get from sales of records, because that was But he also got a fairly small percentage compared to what Isaak got, and he'd agreed to that at a certain point years back, because.
Who thought that nobody knew that was going to become a worldwide sensation?
Because musicians agree to things.
Well, it's also like, when the guy who's the front person in your band and who's writing basically writing the songs says, okay, I want, this is what I want. This is how it's going to be. Take it or leave it, I mean, he wasn't in a position where, he could have, I guess, said forget it and quit the band, but he didn't want to do that. At that point, he really liked being in the band, and he still liked working with Chris and everything. So, but anyway, I just, yeah.
So did you find anything surprising about him that you didn't know when you were doing your research for this book?
Well, I mean, there were a lot of things, but I didn't realize he changed. And I mean, drugs can, hard drugs can really have a negative impact on you. And he just, by the end of his life, not even by the end of his life, but by the 2000s, he wasn't always the guy, the gracious guy that he had been. I mean, his personality kind of changed. And so sometimes he could be that person he used to be sometimes, and then sometimes he wasn't. And that was something that I just had never thought about, or, but in talking to a lot of people, so that was one thing. That was kind of that was really like a sad thing. And the extent of his drug addiction. I mean, I had thought that I had basically just thought that because what I had heard was after he was fired from Chris Isaak's band, which was a period where that was because the drugs were so bad that he couldn't remember what to play sometimes at rehearsals. And I mean, it was just, they couldn't work together anymore. But what I understood was that he had gotten clean, and then I had actually talked to him in 1998 when he had put an instrumental band called the Mysteries together. I talked to him on the phone, and he sounded good. And so I just didn't, I didn't think that he had continued to use drugs.
The San Francisco scene was, the San Francisco scene was a very druggy scene. I mean, it was a very, I mean, I'm not trying to, I mean, I was involved in it. You know, it was, if there was a lot of shit going on, he was not at that point. I mean, that surprised me too, but it was definitely, you know, you talk about people in the book and, you know, Will Shatter and Don Vinyl and all these people. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. Not everybody, you know, but there was definitely a lot of stuff going on. But we were all super young, you know. I mean, people don't realize how the movie ends until they're in that movie. You know what I mean? And then they
Right.
realize, oh, nothing good is ever going to come out of that. I have to say one thing that really, it's so weird reading the book. The thing that really, and my dealings with Jimmy were very, very brief. I remember him from back in the day, and then I saw Chris Isaak play a bunch of times, and he remembered me and went, "Hey, how you doing?" You know, blah blah blah. That he was bald blew my mind. Reading that that sounds so shallow. It sounds so shallow. Like, here's this man battling addiction and this, that, and the other. But I was like, because he was so cute. And I know that sounds really awful, but reading that, I went, holy crap, like what that must have done to his sense of being being on stage and suddenly having these little toupees. And that just shocked me, you know?
Yeah. Well, that was a surprise to me as well. And the thing was that, you know, when Jimmy was in the Avengers, I mean, it was like, on a certain level, it was him and Penelope. I mean, Penelope was kind of a sex symbol of the Avengers, and Jimmy was a sex symbol of the Avengers too. And they almost looked alike at times. There was a point where they both had their hair cut very, very similar.
And the bleached blonde hair, the bleached blonde and stuff.
And the thing was, I mean, Jimmy at that point was really a rock star. And he was, even though he wasn't the front person in that band, I mean, he within the small punk scene, which it was a small scene, but in that scene, he was one of the people who was like a big deal. And so to go from that to becoming seen from the outside as a side guy, and yeah, he has to wear this, you know, has to wear a toupee all the time. And I mean, that had to have really had an impact on him. You know, and even though he was, you know, responsible for the sound of, you know, the Chris Isaak Silvertone thing, like I said, he didn't get the credit for that, you know, in the kind of way that he would have liked,
right?
You know.
So I just want to, in terms of, so you've written this book, it's coming out when is the book, where can we find it, when's it coming out? And I read that you're donating some of the proceeds to Jimmy's son.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm donating 25% of my royalties to Waylon Wilsey, who's a teenager right now, and he doesn't have a father, and he doesn't, I mean, his mother is still alive, but I mean, he basically was being raised by a guardian. You know, when Jimmy died, he was 15, and so until he turned 18, a relative was his guardian, and so you know, I just felt like right from the start, as soon as I started working on it as a book, I just thought, I'm going to give some of the money to Waylon, and I thought 25% was a good idea, because that's a substantial amount. You know, that seemed like, you know, that would be, you know, that just seemed to me that would be like, that would just feel right, you know. So yeah, so that's happening, and then the publisher, who is Hozac Books, HOZAC. Well, it's actually Records and Books, because they put out records and they put out books. They're donating a small percentage as well, not as much as I am, but that's fine.
Oh, that's
but
nice.
they were, but they felt like they wanted to participate in that as well. And the book is going to be out. I mean, the official publication date is June 1, but the book people have been able to pre-order it starting almost, I guess, a month or so ago. And the people who pre-order it, I mean, they expect to start mailing the books out to people on May 22nd. So And the best place to get it is directly from the Hozak Records and Books website. And the reason for that is Waylon, myself, and the indie publisher all make a lot more money when the book is bought directly from the publisher, because when it's bought at a bookstore or from Amazon, I mean, half is gone, right there.
Great. So we'll make sure we put up, because we always put up links and we tweet out links to the book. So we'll put out directly to the distributor, because it's true. Like, everybody takes, by the time they take all of those fees, you're left with almost nothing, really.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate that.
Oh,
and so I just wanted Jimmy to be remembered. That was. I mean, there was all this stuff I was interested in finding out, and I felt like I really did find out a lot about addiction and about, why Jimmy in particular, was somebody who became addicted. But I wanted him. But this book also celebrates Jimmy, and I think it really makes the case for why he's important as a musician, as a guitar player. And I wanted that to be, to exist, so that if someone, wanted to know about this guy, they could find out about him, that it would really be there. And then beyond that, as I worked on this book became almost like it's Jimmy's story, but through Jimmy's story, it's kind of the story of a lot of people who are not the front guy in bands. So that's one story. It's also the story of the dark side of the music business.
Right.
And then within it, it's the story of the San Francisco scene, the story of the Avengers, the story of Chris Isaak and Silvertone.
Very nostalgic. I mean, I know it's like, I just remember seeing Silvertone. I was friends with Chuck Cornelis. So we used to call Chris Isaak. We used to go, oh, that's that guy who thinks he's Elvis. Let's go see him. And I remember John Silvers from the Dills, and he was really cute. He thought he was Elvis. Everybody thought they were Elvis in San Francisco, but none of them actually were. But Michael, we want to thank you so much for doing this. And
I really appreciate it.
And it's really a wonderful, I mean, my nostalgia kind of like, oh, I knew him, I knew her aside. It is a really fascinating look, because music is not just the stars and the frontmen and the front women. It is the people kind of providing that, and he provided a soundtrack, Jimmy. He really literally provided a soundtrack. And so we both want to thank you, Courtney, and I want to thank you for coming, but also for shining a light on someone who deserved to have a light shone on them,
Well, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's how I feel.
Yeah.
And thank you guys. You know what it is. I'm going to let you finish. This was show 35. Jesus. It's like, we've been doing this show so long, I don't even know. Show 95. Remember, guys,
but we
leave a rating. 35. Tell a friend. Follow us. We're on Facebook, and I'm going to let you finish. We're on Twitter, Finishheimer. We fucking hate that name still. We're on Instagram, and I'm going to let you finish NY. We're on TikTok, and I'm going to let you finish podcast. We're on iHeart. We're on Deezer. We're on Apple. We're so
on.
Annoying.
We're like
Bono. We will come sing to you in a bomb shelter in a war.
Bomb shelter. Oh my God.
How did he find those? How did he?
As though the Ukrainians don't have enough to deal with.
He's like,
lives.
I found you guys, and I've come to sing.
Right. And they're like, great. Did you bring any guns? Because that's what we need.
I mean, but he's like, no, but I brought song and a camera crew so it can go out internationally to the world to see that I sang.
Really?
Ladies and gentlemen, and that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
And
Thank you, Michael.
We'll see you next week.
It's NFL draft season, and that means it's time to start thinking about fantasy football. FantasyPoints.com features industry-leading experts and prognosticators using proprietary hand-charted data to help you score more fantasy points. FantasyPoints.com is the place to go for whatever kind of fantasy football you play. Whether you play fantasy football, daily fantasy sports, or do a little bit of everything, Fantasy Points has the meticulously researched content to guide you to victory. And why wait for the fall? Fantasy Points also covers the new spring football league, the UFL. Join the guru, John Hansen, Scott Barrett, Joe Dolan, and other massive names in the fantasy football universe with an exclusive offer. Use code Pantheon for 15% off any Fantasy Points package, including the all-in package with access to every article, tool, and data nugget that Fantasy Points has to offer. That's FantasyPoints.com and code Pantheon for 15% off at Fantasy Points. FantasyPoints.com, code Pantheon. Score more fantasy points.